Okay, so we've got some really lovely Swiss Alps in November images here, but you might have something of your own that you want to do as well, which is fine. Very different, all of them. Even the skies are very different. We've got really clear, crisp ones, and then, they almost create almost this kind of ice, a little bit of an ice fog. And then we've got kind of, more kind of sunrise ones and then, sunset ones as well. So they're really lovely, aren't they? All different. Um, but yeah, so just go for the one that you really, really kind of makes you think, oh yeah, I'm just really attached to really, really like the colours in the sky or the contrast of landscape or whatever it is. All we're going to do when we kind of start to deconstruct it and just put a few marks in just so that we know where we're going is we're just going to deconstruct it and just put in the main features. Nothing at the forefront, so nothing tiny like little, little houses or um, little grasses or anything yet, or any, even these little rocks. I wouldn't put those in. We can just put those over the top. So anything that's a big piece that separates from something else. So I would put this one in here. I'd just a little sketch the bottom here, this part, and then where that goes. You could put the big rock in because it is quite solid shape. Here again, we've got, the mountains across and then the grass. You can put the house in if you want to. It's just you'll need to bring in the background behind it a little bit. So that's fine. You can bring it into where you've sketched. Yeah, and then this one is like lots of mountains coming behind. Just lovely, aren't they? The reason I've gone for this one, this is the one that I lean towards, but I thought it'd be really nice to demonstrate a little bit more of the textures and how to get the different colours and things on here. But as I said, I may end up just going to say here and then just get putting some water in down here. We'll see how it goes. Just so I can really kind of do quite a bit more of the demo with the palette knife. So again, if it's easier for you, you can I'll just demonstrate it on that one. If it's easier for you, you can just go in. I'm just looking for my pen actually because that's not standing out. You can just, put your paint picture into 4/4. Does help quite a bit. And then you can see how far things come in and up. It's quite handy. So if I do it on this one. But by the way, you can change any of the dimensions, the colours. You might think, oh, I like that, but I really don't like all of that very, very dark colour. But you can always change this mountain to include some more of the purpley tones in here if that you picked off from another, or you can change the sky a little bit. It's entirely up to you. If you want to lift the whole thing a little bit, then by all means, it's your artistic license there. So if you're wanting to do that and transfer it just to give you a little bit more confidence as to where things go, then you can just sketch. I'm doing just mine with pen, but obviously if you're sketching, just make it nice and light so that you can see really clearly what's going on. And then, just start to put your sections in. You want to keep yours nice and light just so that you can get everything over the top, really. Sometimes if you've got a light sky and then lots of dark lines, it can scrub them up and make them a little bit muddy, the colours. And again, this is when I say sketch, it is a fairly light sketch to be fair, because we can change anything and we tend to do that as our observation becomes clearer. We do tend to shift things, move things, which is good. So we're not tied to having things exactly as they are all the time. It's our impression of it anyway. Yeah, I've gone right out there with this sketch. I might bring it back in, might not. You know, if you're doing like something like this that's got quite a big, you think, oh, I don't know how I'm going to separate this all out. Like there's an obvious chunk here with a big, a big triangular shape. I'm going to just put that in to help myself break these rocks up a little bit. So that if you've got any obvious shapes, this is another similar one where you've got these a few little different colours. You can pop those in as well if that helps, just to think, okay, I can see now where the different shapes are. It's helpful, then by all means pop that in as well. But it's quite interesting when we start to look at the rocky shapes and structures. It's not something that I would say we do a lot of. So it's nice to explore different topics. Okay. So because obviously it is acrylics, as last week, we're going to be thinking about, the back coming forwards. Um, and I know we had flowers last week, but obviously what we tend to find with a landscape is that we end up working top down. And that's quite a natural thing that happens because we tend to want to get the sky that's behind the mountains or the sky that's behind, any cliff edges or and then anything that overlaps, we'll do that next. So that would be, this kind of darker land area here. And then even with the sky, we work on if we work on that as a whole, some of these skies are very light, but you can put a couple of tones in with those. So you can have a different coloured blue, sky blue mixed with white here, and a darker one round here. So you can kind of get it to transition. This one's got obviously much warmer tones in there. So you've just got to be careful not to kind of cross these two over, but I'll take you through that when I do this one. Um, and we tend to see a little bit more light colour as we get nearer to the horizon um, and to the land. It's just, often how things work, unless there's a great big storm cloud there, and that's a bit different story. So it's quite interesting to see that. But yeah, we're just going to make sure we're not going to muddy and make our sky green because we've got kind of yellowy warm tones with a cooler blue. We've got to be a little bit more careful, whereas we can just mix these on, as we're painting them, we can kind of just move our brush side to side and get those lovely tones and just add in more white as we go with those. So I'm just going to move these out of the way for now and have a little look. So I'm get my palette out. So it's a great opportunity though to explore the different blues and hues or different tones that you've got in your kit. So you may have like ultramarine blue, or you may have a phthalo blue, phthalo blue. You may have Prussian blue. You may have cerulean blue, which is much more kind of turquoisey, or you may have a turquoise blue. So it's really well worth having a little experiment to see which, just to see what happens when you mix them all with white if you're not familiar with the ones in your kit or you've forgotten. So I've just got my the other, so this is more of a cerulean blue. And just see, you might even want to mix a couple of blues together while you're doing it. I think I'm going to use quite a bit of white today, so I'm going to have more white out there. Just because if we're putting snow and things on mountains, or some of the tones on the other ones have got a lot of, they're quite pastely. These colours are quite powdery and pastely. So we tend to put more white, in the mix of these hillsides and things like that. And these aren't, they're darker, but they've got like a They kind of got like a little blue tone or whatever tones you can see in there. So we can put a little touch of white in those as well. So I'm going to get a few colours out. So I'm going to try these two. Now, obviously, some of this is a little bit more misty here, and it's entirely up to what you see. So, if you're seeing it as some of these colours as purples, and same with the other skies, what tones can you see? I'm just going to pop a little bit of purple in because I was seeing purple in the hills this morning as well. Um, or you might, some of these other colours over the top, or you might think about using Payne's Grey, which is a really dark blue. You might want to mix a couple of colours together to try and get these clouds that come over the top. So we're going to be layering over that undercoat. However, where you get big areas like here, we don't necessarily need to put this colour underneath it. We can just have a slightly a slightly kind of similar tone to this underneath, and then just put the brighter, lighter ones over the top. So we don't need to put blue everywhere, is what I'm trying to say, where you've got these other warmer tones, because there's no point really. So for that one, to get some yellow out, we have got that lovely difference between warm and cool tones in here, which is really nice. So I'm going to try a couple of tones of yellow. This is, I would say, more peachy. And it's quite handy to get a more peachy colour if you use a warmer yellow. This one's Azo yellow, but you could have something like Cajun yellow. This would be a more bright colour, this one. This is a primary yellow. It's a little bit more acidic, but you can try them anyway. And then have a little go. I've just got a Cajun. This one's a scarlet, but it's quite a warm scarlet reds. Some of them are quite pillar box red. But I'm gone for this one that's slightly warmer. When I say warmer, I just mean it's got a little bit more yellow in it. I'll get some of that out as well. And that's how I'm going to mix my orange because I haven't got my orange. And then we can go from there. So I'm just going to use my palette knife and a bit of tissue handy just to mix up in the middle. And then I'm going to test some of the things. But if you've only got like two coloured tones in your sky, then you just, you can mix up those, have plenty ready, and those you can blend in together. Now, I'm not going to paint my sky actually with my palette knife. I'm just going to do the some of the, the harder edges. But of course you can, if you think, do you know what, I'd really like to, then by all means do. So we've almost got to go back to what actually is underneath these colours, So I'm looking at the top, this colour, the blues. I'm just going to test these out before I mix up a load. All of the colours will respond so differently with white and how much you add. Some more white in there. The key is just to really enjoy doing that. A bit of a play. And, like I said before, your colour doesn't need to be exactly the same anyway. So try adding a bit of this blue, just to make it a little bit more. Just a bit more depth to it underneath. I'm going to give this a test with my small brush. Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm feeling it's a bit darker over here, so what I might do underneath there is I'm just going to mix a tiny bit of Payne's Grey, a very small amount though, because it's ever so dark. The pigment in there. Just to kind of dull it down a little bit, take out some of the colour. And I might use one colour outside. The key really is just to have a play around and see what colours you're coming up with in your palette. Yeah, that feels a bit just slightly cooler over that side. So I'm going to put these two on together at the top. And then obviously go over with some of these lighter ones, and then I'll think about a colour to use down here. But if you've got one blue that comes all the way down and you want that to blend, then get all of your colours that you're using together, and then you can just kind of keep swiping over them together. If they're a similar hue, it works well anyway. So I'm just going to take that off. I'm going in with my flat brush. As a flat brush is great, especially for blended skies. I know I mentioned this before, blended backgrounds, because you can just kind of work the colour in. I'm just going to add in a few drops of water so that it's nice and smooth. You've got a little dropper or something before your water gets dirty. Quite handy. Okay. So even though I've got some overlapping cloud, I am going to come in and get this, start to blend over here and underneath here. Because I can pop those clouds over the top. And I'm going to come in a little bit, just a little bit into where the edge of this is, just so that I've covered it in case I want to, in case I haven't come quite far enough in, and then it's definitely covered then. And then I'm going to continue over this side with a slightly darker one. Just feel like it does feel like it's darker. So it may feel like, that it's a bit blocky on this one, but we'll soften it down as we go down. And I'm just going to take just going in with just a damp brush now, softening that on this edge for a moment. Not really wet, but just damp enough that kind of softened it a little bit. And then, we can work into those whilst it's damp, or just let it dry. I'm just let it dry for a few minutes. So it's not, when I put this on, it's not going to come, because I've got quite thick paint on there. So it's not going to come up and just completely muddy. But just give it a few minutes. And then whilst I'm doing that, I'm just going to look at the colours under here as a tone that I could mix, where you get these different coloured areas. I think the other one that's very like it is this one, where we've got this much lighter, brighter towards the horizon. And this very light kind of blue in the middle. It's almost meeting there, isn't it? So for a peachy tone, go for a warmish yellow, a warmish red. So it's not going to, this wouldn't give you like a pink tone really. It's the combination of the two warm colours. Maybe a bit more yellow in there. And then I'm going to add the white to it. And then we'll see if it's a tone that we want. Now, if you use, a less warm red, you'll end up with, and white, obviously it will be more pink, but even this, if you mix it, it'll be a kind of a peachy pink, just because it's got more yellow in it anyway. So that's an interesting one. So try the different reds with the whites and the yellow, see what you get. Okay, so that's still quite, I'm feeling that's still quite, it's quite peachy, but I think I want it a little bit more yellowy. I'm just going to pop in a bit more white to start with, because it's still not quite as pastely as I want the underside of it. And I'm going to pop a bit more of this yellow back in. Until I'm happy with the tone. And again, just have a little experiment, can't you, to see if you're happy with what you've got there. Making sure I've got the blue tone off my brush. Right, so I'm still feeling I want that to be a bit more yellowy. That's the beauty. If you do little bits at a time, you can then think, yeah, I'm kind of ending up where I want to go. Try that again. Yeah, it's definitely warming up a little bit. Okay, so we've got, getting the other colours that are in the background as well. So I'm now going to go in with that one. Just the biggest thing really is making sure if you're using the same brush, and I know it's a really obvious thing, but when you're going from cool colours to warm colours, we can end up with this kind of mud in the middle just because it seeps out of the bottom of the brush. So I always just make sure, like you can see it coming out there actually, it's not sitting in the bottom of the brush. You just give it an extra clean and just make sure it's all out. And then you'll know your colours are not going to get transferred. So I've got this much peachier one here that we made up with the yellow and the red and the white. And then I'm just going to get that one in. Start bringing this up from the bottom. And again, I've gone in a little bit into the middle there. And a little bit down this side. Now it'll start to look a bit patchy, but just stick with it. Because when we've got clouds and things layered over, again, it will change. Will change the feel of it really. So this is just kind of to start, so we've got something in place. And then obviously here we can see that we've got a little bit of this kind of mist coming over, but also we have got some of these slightly darker blues in there. I'd say that it's a bit cooler, so it's almost not quite as vibrant as up here. So I'm going to just go back to my colour palette. Make sure this is out of the brush, and then start to bring in. I'm going to make it a bit lighter with a bit more white, but I've gone in with this cooler one that had a little bit of Payne's grey added to it. Just it's slightly more moody under there. But a bit lighter with a bit more of a tint in so that it is actually um, so we're getting towards, like, as we're coming down, sometimes we find that. And it's a good little trick anyway, because sometimes we just can't quite work out what colour that, a section's going to be. If you get the obvious ones into place, then you can work out, we're literally reading between the lines with colour, aren't we? So just kind of getting this lightness. And then over here as well. I'm just being a little bit careful that I don't end up with this green sky where it meets here. I've just got to give it a go and get in there, and hopefully it will be fine. So we'll end up with just a few tones in there before then we start kind of overlapping. This one's interesting anyway. This one I would say transitions a bit more. So you've got this lightness, and then you've got obviously all these very bright, much more bright, vivid oranges as well, there. But then in the middle here, you've almost got, it is like this lighter blue, isn't it? And then it's almost transitioning through a little bit. So that's an interesting one. But we can put a mist over the top of the whole thing actually when it's dry. So don't worry about that as well. But here we've got more of an obvious, looks like a line, doesn't it, with all this light cloud over, so we get that kind of a shape anyway. And then what we can start to do then is look next at what we're going to overlay, what we're going to put on over the top. And usually I say to people, just look at the cloud and see what comes first. And quite often, if it's a cloud that's got a lot of dark in it, I tend to put the dark cloud in first, but sometimes it's overlapping like it is here, it's overlapping that one. So we've just got to be just look nice and carefully, really. You can even kind of work backwards or work from here upwards if you want to, and then build up the layers that way. It doesn't really matter, as long as we're just looking and having a little, enjoying those colours and everything. That's the main thing. So this bit down here, I'm just going to bring in a couple of colours. So let's see. Nice bright one. I want a nice bright one in there that's a bit more vivid than the colour we've used. So I may even go with a bit of this bright yellow, or you could even use, the warmer yellow. Just see if you pop it in, see what happens. Now, if you could use the edge of your palette knife if you wanted to, or you can just start to get in a few of these colours just with a flat brush and just kind of pull it, just drag it as though it's a bit of a cloud there. And or you could just make a tint as well with white if you prefer. Do both, see what happens. Sometimes you get a different effect. If you put a bright colour like the yellow on, it'll pop out in a different way to if you put a tint on with white, but just try both and see which you prefer. So we've got some lighter cloud up here, so I've mixed a white in here. I'm just gonna break it up a little bit. I know it's quite a hard line on here, but quite nice just to kind of roll that down a little bit. You can do both. You can have a lighter one, on the top of a brighter one if you want to, and try that with the cloud. We just try and get that kind of dragging feeling, that, softness in there, really. You might want a real pop of bright coming out of there from behind, just so it lifts it a bit. Just have a little explore and see. And then just start to build up now, what else can you see? What other colours? I'm going to mix up some kind of light ones and some purpley ones because I really like these colours in here. So there's a few one underneath there, so I'll pop that one in. I'll mix a little bit of a tint with this orange. And I'm just pulling that, like just little shapes with my flat brush at the minute, but you can, if you've got anything that you want to soften, again, I think I mentioned last week, you can just soften that with a finger, or you can, little end of a mop brush, fluffy brush, or even a little bit of an earbud or something. So we can soften all this down and make it feel more cloud-like if we want to as well, So I can almost push this up as well if I want that to feel like, it's a bit softer, and I can bring that over the top of things with just my fingertip there. It's just, just trying some things out so that you've got some different things, different effects to try. So I'm going to soften this middle down now. And you can even, build up so that you've got a very light bit in the middle, where if it's showing that it's lighter in one place or brighter in one place, so that there's even some kind of differentiation between some of the areas here, really. Putting them in. So that's all we can do is just keep bringing these colours over. I'm going to put these dark ones in now so that they kind of sink backwards a bit as well. And then go over the top with a lighter one. But we're just observing those. And if you've already done your sky, just have a little look at what the next layer, the colours that are in there. I'll take a pause in a minute. I'll just do this little bit. And then take a pause and come and chat to everybody. I'm going to try and get this colour here. I'm going to bring in some purple and some Payne's grey. And that's going to be really intense as it is. That's going to be too dark for me. So I may, because this has already got some white in it, let's bring a little bit of this in. A bit more. So it's just kind of going to make it a bit more pastel-y, less intense. So if I'm wanting to make it, less colourful, but you might love the colour of it, I would just bring in that Payne's grey, or you could even put a little bit of blue and a tiny dot of dark brown. That will help as well if you haven't got Payne's grey. It just kind of takes the colour out a little bit. But as I said, you might really like the colour and want to use it in there. Let's give that a try. Okay. Yeah, so there's not much purple in there actually, you can see that. If you're wanting a bit more purple in. Okay, so again, just bring that over. And I'm just making dragging marks here with my brush, but you could do sideways. You could get your round brush and kind of make some shapes there with this cloud. Just deciding, how you want to try and create it. Like we said before, it's what naturally feels right to you. It's really important. Start making these marks and it's working, then keep going. The sky always transforms, I think, once you get the actual foreground in, funnily enough. And we're just putting things into place so that we've got the different elements of the different clouds and things like that. I'm just tapping my finger along there. Just being a bit careful, as I mentioned before, where you've got a cooler tone and a dark, and a warmer tone together, so we don't overmix that on the canvas. I'm just popping in nice and carefully. I've got a bit brighter here. And if you get to the point where you think, actually, it's really fluffy and it feels a bit mist-like, but I'm not, I'm not sure how to do that. So I would say get the bits on that feel a little bit like thicker in the cloud. Where it's wispy, then what we can do there, and this might be if you've got a mist, a blue mist over the top as well. You literally mix up the colour that you want. So it could be a much lighter tint of blue, or it could be like here. I'm just going to mix up, in fact, I'll probably just use this colour that I've mixed here, which is that one. And I'm just going to thin it out slightly with a bit of water. And basically you can paint that over any dry areas that you've got here. So you can see through it basically. So you'll be able to see your canvas through it. So it actually feels like mist. Now you can thin it down even further. When that's dry, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. I think it's difficult. It's picking up on the camera, but when it's dried, so it pulls this fog over, but you could do that over the bottom of an area as well if you've got that in there. So I'm going in with this misty effect, and then I'm going to double up and put in some of the brighter areas over the top of that. And bring this all the way along, bring this kind of a bit misty up here. It's a little bit translucent. And then, you can just kind of make dragging noises, dragging motions is what I meant, over the top to kind of create this nice mist. It's when you get it on the mountaintop as well, it's lovely to do. And then from there, you can go in and just take, bits of what you were using before, a bit thicker paint, and then just drop in and build up the lightest areas. That's how you do that with the clouds. So, I'm going in with a bit more paint on it now than just water, so that those areas will pop out a little bit more than these ones, the ones that are really thin. And we're just adding, so all we're doing is adding a little bit of dimension to our clouds by doing that. Might only be a tiny touch in some areas, just a little. But you can always add, if it gets too thin, you can always add another layer on top. That's the way to do it, really. Just build up the layers until it's thick enough. Sometimes we're going really, really thin, and think, oh, actually, it's not quite enough. Or we thin the colour down too much. So we just go back in and you can just add another layer with a bit more colour, for example, over the top. Whether it's a peachy colour or pinky colour or whatever. Yeah. So I'm going to leave that now for a bit, because what can happen is we can get really a bit bogged down with the sky, and actually we want the sky to kind of flow into that background really eventually. So I'm just going to let it dry for a bit, and then I'll decide if I want to do anything later to it, because we can always add more, less paint over the top once it's dry anyway. So all's not, it's not lost or anything like that. Soften that down. And then bring that forward. So I'm going to stop there and come and see how everybody's doing. Okay, so having a little look at how to, bring in some of this cliff top. I mean, I can just go in with this little area here actually, but I think I'm going to do that afterwards. Well, I'm going to start the top just so that if anyone wants a bit of demo with the palette knife first, because certainly the other ones there's more of that in the background. So I'll do that for you guys. So for me, my mountain here is really quite, I'd say dark, but I did mention this earlier. If you're wanting to make it lighter, you can. So some of these are, and where I'll put the over there, I think. Yep, there it is. Some of these, so this one is quite bluish toned. This one has got almost that mist over the top, hasn't it? Which we could put on with light blue and white thinned right down over the top afterwards, if you want to do that with the mist. But it's quite pastely as well. It's not very warm. And this burnt umber is one of the darkest browns you can get, but actually all the brands are so different, and some of them aren't very dark at all. So you might want to put a bit of Payne's grey or something in there, or even a dark blue. So you could put a dark blue like ultramarine and brown together, and it'll make a very dark colour. But you may also want to add a little bit of white into that, so it's a bit slightly more pastely. This one obviously has got some beautiful colours in as well, like almost purples and things like that. And some of it might have like, you might be seeing pink tones, you might be seeing kind of warmer brown tones in here. So they're all very different. So you've got to like look at the different tones you can find in and decide for your shadows, how dark do you want to go? Now this one, obviously, I'm going to demonstrate this one as dark as it is. I'm going to pop some burnt umber down into my palette. There's if she can get out of the tube. There we go. So I've got some dark brown. I've got some Payne's grey from earlier as well. But also this top bit here feels very warm to me. So I'm going to probably use a bit of red and yellow on there. And I'm also going to use some burnt sienna, which is a really beautiful warm red. Sorry, warm red brown. And that's the difference actually we were talking about earlier with tones. So that the two browns here, one is this is much cooler, although it's still got some warmth to it. You can see how much more red that this one's got in it. And if we want to make this cooler, we just add a blue to it, and it will make it really dark. So we can then work out which tone of the colour to use. So I'll just do that really briefly as a demo. It'll really might help actually. So if I just put that on to test the colours there, as it is, we've got warmer burnt sienna, which is like this colour at the top. That happens often when we get the light shining on something that's brown, and and also especially if the light is very warm, to different times of year as well. It's a gorgeous colour for autumn as well as rocks. And then we have a darker brown, which has got less red in it. It's not got hardly any red in that, but it's still got some warmth to it. And then if we then mix our own very dark brown, we can almost get a colour that's almost black. And if I start with 50-50, and so we're going cool here, this will give us darker than Payne's grey. So this is adding the blue, and that's what happens there. So that's great for some of these shadows down here. So we can use, it just shows how we can just add a bit of a bluish tone. There we go. So I'm going to need some of that as well. So I want to start with this little bit here. Now, this is sometimes people get a little bit, uh, you know, lost in all of this rock. So what you can do is just do little patches at a time if that helps. So I could just do this outside and then this bit here to start with, for example. So I'm going to go in with my warm colours here, and just go in with this sienna and make sure that that blue's off my brush, otherwise it would be making it really dull. And start to get just some shape. Now, you can go full in with your palette knife, or you can do some of the undercover colours with a brush. And so if you feel a bit more like you want to, just have a little bit more control to start with. The thing with a palette knife, it's great. But it's like any other new brush or tool that we might use, or any new topic, that sometimes it takes quite a bit of practice with to get it. So if you feel like you want to just get a little bit on with this first with a brush, I'm going to do that just because mine's so small. I'm going to get some of this here, the colours that are underneath this rock. I'm just kind of following this down a bit. I then would get in any shadows in this little area that I'm tackling first here. So there are a few darker ones. So I've got to decide, is it, which brown am I going to use? But I think I'm actually going to go in with this really dark one. Just pop in the shadowy bits first. They're really dark. And that's really so we can get the lights on last over the top. Is there any other bits? Yeah, here. This is quite dark underneath it. It's very shady. I'm just going to do a little bit around it. So you can just, as I said, you can just go into one little bit on your rock face if it helps you feel a bit more confident. And I'm going to use the palette knife to scrape over the top with the white, basically. So I'm just not still observing, what's really bright and things here. And I'm going to go in with a nice bright yellow. And I may have a bit of red as well, so I'm making an orange with it, but you might already have an orange that you want to use. And just bring that over. This is where we're getting the real kind of hazy, lovely light shining on it. A little bit up here. See? We can only go from what we think we can see, can't we? So just observing what we're seeing is great. Okay, so I'm going to go in with a slightly cooler brown under this side, because it's kind of out of the sun's there clearly on this area down this side. It's a little bit on there, but I'm going to go in with a slightly darker one to start with. And I'm just laying down a base really, because then when you bring the white over the top, it'll jump out a little bit. So I'm just kind of painting something in for a start so that we can see. And then I'm going to have great fun going over the palette knife. I'm just putting this shadow in here really just so that it helps. It helps with working out where different sections are. So it's going to look very childlike. You'll probably put this on and think, oh my gosh, it doesn't look anything like a rock. Don't worry. It does. It's that process that takes time. And I'm going to want this to be more angular, which I'm going to do with my palette knife anyway. And then if you've got somewhere to practice, that's great. So you could even practice on a, on a bit of a side here. So you could, paint a little bit of a blob in there. Probably a bit too watery actually, is that what I've just done? And then whilst that's drying, we want it to be almost dry, semi-dry. But you can, to be fair, I was demonstrating this morning and I needed to demonstrate it quite quickly. So I did actually put load of my palette knife up. So it can be done. So don't worry too much if it's not completely dry. You can always just try. And then what we're doing is you can use all edges of a palette knife for painting. You can use the point. I tend to kind of scrape mine onto the side like that. So it's like actually it's more up this side. And I tend to kind of like scrape it up, or you could do it the other way and scrape it down. And again, how much you put on is trial and error. So I'm going to bring it over this bit that's dried already here. So you can kind of just almost start to bring things over in different angles. You can come downwards, you can come upwards, over the top, so that we end up with a little bit, it looks scrapey, it looks very much like a mountaintop actually. So, but you can also load it up like the top end of your palette knife as well and kind of push up. And you can also use it completely on its edge like that. So it's like it's a really multi-purpose tool to use. And then just get a straight edge downwards or across. So if I do that up on this top bit here, I can kind of get a nicer, a more crisp edge with it that way as well. So I'm just wondering if this is dry. Let's see if it's drying. Depends how much you put on, but you can still just go in and start splodging it in between. So I'm going to just get one edge, a little edge, dip it in again. If you get too much on, just scrape it back off again. I'm going to go in there. And I want this to come down a little bit. So you can come downwards, or you can come across, so you can get an edge, another edge on there. I'm actually using my right hand now. So let's see. So if I can get a bit more of an edge in there, so it's a bit easy to do. And then you just go in. I think when you've got A4 size, it's easier. At the moment, I've got this tiny little thing, so I can really only put mine on the edge to come down this way. But you just end up kind of dragging it over, and it leaves like nice little gaps in there. And if it hasn't, and you wanted a gap in there, you can just go in and scrape out. So you end up, what we're doing is just adding on and dragging and scraping and creating a lot of shapes, really, which is exactly what we get with the snow, because it sits on these cliff edges. And then you can also, if you haven't got any obvious shapes that you want to put on, you can dot them. So you know where you get some little dots and things, or you get little smaller marks. You can just start to pop on, a few of those as well. So you can dot the edges. It's such a multi-purpose tool. If you go over like I have, don't worry about it. You can just get a paintbrush whilst it's still wet. If you've got a lot of paint on there, you can just squitch it off. But look, I've just gone with a clean, damp brush, and I've just tied in that end up because I've gone over a little bit. Which is all part of the trial and error of using a palette knife when you get started again with them. But they are really good fun just to have a play with, to be fair. So here, where there's little bits coming down the mountainside, we'll just follow that. You can drag it up, down, across, and just have a good experiment, see what it's like. You can soften bits, add bits, take bits off. splat it, look, to soften things down. There's so many things you can do with it. And then just keep going wherever you want to put those lighter ones. Now, sometimes the white isn't always white as well. So up here, it's very bright in the sun. But as we come down, it may be when you look at your tone, you might think, actually, it's got a bit of a blue in it, that, or it's got a bit of a grey in it, or it's got a bit of orange in it. Because sometimes you get, when it's in the sun, sometimes it shines a bit peachy colour or something, but more white. And if you're not sure, look at the edge of your paper on the outside and compare it and think, oh, that's bright white, that's bright white. Actually, this is a slightly... So you can just make a tint and mix up a small amount of another colour. So just keep working through, just add in bits, pulling it down, pulling it up. It's easier, I think, when you get a big block of snow. So this is a bit scrapey, I would say, here. So we're getting this, yeah, it's a bit more scrapey over the top with little bits here and there. But when you get a good patch, it's really fun to kind of just pull and drag through. So at the moment, it's just a bit bitty. But that's fine. And it's like anything else. The more we do on it, the more our brain gets used to what it actually is, because sometimes at the beginning it thinks, what is it I'm actually doing, because it's not making sense yet, but stick with it. So I'm going to go in with the next patch now. I mean, you can just lay all the underside down completely first if you prefer and work that way. You know, you don't have to wait. And if you haven't got a palette knife, like I said, if you've got an old like credit card or something like that, you can cut it and just, you know, a triangle bit and just, you know, and carefully scrape down. Or the other option is to use a fan brush, where you can just pull. So if I dip this in, I'm only going to put it on one edge there, look. But what I can do is I can pull, and it does a similar job. I'm loading mine up a bit heavy now because I've got to demo. But again, you get all these little blobs in there. They're quite easy to put different shapes in with. And again, you know, if you put too much on, it's not lost because it's still wet. You can just pull it out. So yeah, it's really, really quite versatile. I'm just going to wash that off though. It's the only thing with your fan brushes and things, you need to get the paint off when you're not using it. Right, let's get on more of this really dark one. And this one is just me putting dark blue with brown. But yeah, as I said, if you're starting to feel like you're really enjoying that palette knife, then by all means start to put the rest on, you know, this with it and scrape it in, etc. Or if you're quite liking just doing a bit of both with your brush, then stick with that. But you can still get the sense with your brush strokes, so you can actually bring that in. You know, again, a flat brush does that. I mean, you can use a round if it feels it giving you a bit more control, but a flat brush as well does a very similar job in that it'll put lovely marks in your paper or on your canvas. So you can kind of create dimensional marks. I'm going to go in with that ultramarine blue again and brown. Yeah, you can kind of create the shapes of the mountains with your brush strokes, which is lovely. Make it really textured that way, so you can see where you're going with it. Fascinating, isn't it? How you can get all these in. And then just keep going, you know, adding a little bit more of your white. And you'll learn how much to put on, how much to load up, how much you want, how much you don't want. I'm not going to go in with bright white there. I'm just going to make a little bit of a tint over here. I'm going to add the smallest amount of this, really small, just so it's not quite as bright as white. It'll still show up as quite a big contrast, between the dark colour because it's still a tint, but it's not going to be quite as bright as that at the top. So it will feel a little bit more like it is in the shadow, which is probably what we want it to do. Or you can put brown in there, whatever you feel. So this is slightly duller than that white there. You can see that one and that one together. So that when we've got the white in the shadow, you can see that it changes. So coming down here to create the edge of this bit. Dragging down. And then any little bits that are on here. But yeah, it's a similar thing in that, you're just letting your hand take over really and create some of these lovely shapes. Not, don't think too much about it, I'd say. Just let it go and explore and see if you like it. I mean, the first time you use a palette knife, you just having a little go with the tool. Where it builds up more heavily, you can then really kind of get more on your brush if you want to, more on your palette knife and make, it might be brighter in certain bits where it's kind of like coming down, it's, sticking up a little bit more. Here around this side here, there's loads on. So I can load my brush up a little bit more like that. So just keep going with it. It might be looks a bit warmer down there, so I'm gonna put a little bit of this reddy brown in this end. Because that's what I'm seeing there, it's kind of coming in. It's probably the stone, the colour of the rock underneath. But we're just practicing, getting some movement and flow in there, which is actually good fun. Yeah. So you can tap bits, you can do more bits. It's just all good fun, isn't it? Putting some of these marks in. And also if you've gone, like I said, if you can't lift it back out because you think, oh, I've put too much in, just go back in with your brush and get some of those shadows back into place as well. Use my other palette to mix those. And this will be your style as well. So it's more than just experimenting. It's like, what's coming out of your hand. Just let it flow really easily. Once you start doing it and you're getting into a flow with it and whatever's coming out, whichever direction and how it's moving is a really good thing. Because you can't fight a natural flow. It's really good to go with it and see what happens. Might take you to do something that you just didn't realize that you could do. It's great. Now you can also leave gaps, where you want some snow to go as well. That's fine to do that. And also, it doesn't matter at all if it doesn't look exactly the same. This is our artist impression of what we're doing. It doesn't have to, not every single curve has to be on there. Nobody knows. Nobody ever knows what we're doing. Um, and if you might put something in, you think, oh, I like that, or you think, I don't want to put any more of that in there. Had enough of that. And put all these lovely shapes down. Yeah, just keep going and exploring that with it. And as I said, you might want to completely flip over to a palette knife and just get lots of that in there. Right, I'm going to take a pause and just make sure everybody's getting on okay. And I'm dragging a little bit of this dark over the top, and I've got it, because the paint underneath it's so thick, it's dragging really nicely with this flat brush actually to kind of create that, that interesting shape that you get with them. Lovely. Very enjoyable, isn't it? So let me just switch over and take a pause there. So we're just going to have a little finish off of some of these fantastic marks here, and really kind of, I think as the time goes on, you unfold a little bit and just get a little bit more into, um, just get a little bit more. And we end up, I think the more we do with it, you end up getting a little bit looser with your marks. So it's just a natural progression. I think once you get comfortable with the tool that you've got, that's sort of it is. Should just feel to you like that you can tell it's mountain. And then, where it's a little bit more kind of broken, you just put some little draggy marks on there, break it up a little bit. And then, just have a good step away from it as well. That will definitely help. I'm just going to put this little bit of sky in here. I feel like I can see a bit of blue, a bit of a haze in perhaps as well, a bit of purple in there. Just interpret it how you want. So obviously I've got to be a bit more careful coming around the edges here because I've left this till last, which of course is easier if you put it in first, but I wanted to make sure I'm just demoing some of the mountains. Then yeah, do you want a bit of a hazy over the top? Is the question there. There's a little bit of dark cloud in here as well. It feels a little bit translucent, so I'll put a little bit of water in. And everything kind of just slips back in. Then you can, go back in and, decide if you want to put any more lighter cloud in. Like up here, I can see this is much lighter than this is dried, much darker, but I have to do that. Just pop that in. Just going to create a tiny bit more colour. I'm just going to stop there, I think, today. I could take a little bit of haze over here if I wanted to as well. Just thin down a little layer, just kind of where the bottom of this mountain is there. Just to kind of lighten it up slightly, or you can take it even darker. And then just give yourself a bit of a step back from it. And that's really important when you've got so much texture on it. It does feel very intense when you're doing it. And then it's just a new thing to try with a palette knife. It's all good fun. So I hope you enjoyed that, and have a little look from afar at what you've done. Because as I said, it's quite intense, but when you put it from a distance, it all just kind of steps into place. So it's all good fun. Enjoy having a palette knife experience. Bye bye.